June 6, 1944. Before the sun rises over the English Channel, the fate of the entire world hangs by a thread. 156,000 men. 5 beaches. One impossible mission. What happens in the next 24 hours will change history forever. To understand why June 6, 1944 became the pivotal turning point of the Second World War, we must understand the world that existed before it. By the spring of 1944, Nazi Germany had occupied Western Europe for 4 years. From Norway to the Mediterranean, Hitler's forces controlled a continent. The Soviet Union bled on the Eastern Front. Britain had endured years of bombing, and the people of occupied France lived under a shadow that seemed as though it might never lift. The Allied nations knew that to liberate Europe, they would have to do something no military force had ever attempted on such a scale. They would have to cross one of the most treacherous bodies of water in the world, land on heavily fortified beaches, and fight their way into the heart of a defended continent. The plan was called Operation Overlord, and it would require the largest amphibious invasion in the history of warfare. The architect of that coastal defense was a man who understood Allied thinking better than almost any German officer alive. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox, had been tasked by Hitler with making the Atlantic Wall impenetrable. Rommel toured the French coastline throughout the spring of 1944, inspecting every bunker, every gun emplacement, every stretch of beach. He ordered millions of mines laid. He ordered thousands of wooden stakes and steel obstacles planted in the surf zone to tear the bottoms out of landing craft. He drove his men relentlessly. Because Rommel understood something that chilled him to his core. If the Allies landed successfully, if they gained even a foothold on French soil, Germany could not hold them back. Everything would depend on what happened in the first few hours. Rommel called the day of invasion the longest day, for both sides. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day. The evening of June 5, 1944. Across the south of England, in airfields and harbors stretching from Cornwall to Kent, the greatest military operation in human history is beginning to move. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower has made one of the most consequential decisions in military history. Despite rough weather, despite winds and high waves in the Channel, he gives the order, "Go!" At airfields across England, nearly 13,000 American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions climb aboard C-47 transport aircraft. Their faces are painted with camouflage, their pockets are stuffed with ammunition, rations, and a small brass cricket clicker to identify friends in the dark. Many of these young men are teenagers. Most have never seen combat. They will jump into the darkness over occupied France, behind enemy lines, before the beach landings even begin. Their mission is to secure the flanks of the invasion, to hold the roads, the causeways, and the bridges that the men on the beaches will desperately need. Simultaneously, on the other side of the invasion zone, British and Canadian paratroopers of the 6th Airborne Division leap into the Normandy darkness. Their target is the eastern flank. Most critically, they must capture and hold Pegasus Bridge, a crucial crossing over the Caen Canal. If German armored units cross that bridge and reach the beaches at dawn, the invasion could fail before it even truly begins. In one of the most daring operations of the entire war, Major John Howard leads a glider assault. Wooden Horsa gliders, packed with soldiers, are silently towed across the channel and then cut loose to land in near total darkness. They crash land within meters of the bridge. The soldiers burst from the wreckage and assault the bridge on foot. The entire operation takes less than 15 minutes. Pegasus Bridge is secured. It is 0:21 hours on June 6, 1944. The invasion of Europe has begun. Operation Overlord called for simultaneous landings on 5 beaches along a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coastline. Each beach was assigned a code name. From west to east: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Utah and Omaha were American beaches. Gold and Sword were British. Juno belonged to the Canadians. Each beach presented unique challenges. Each would write its own chapter in history. The plan called for naval bombardment to begin before dawn, softening German defenses. Then, as the sky lightened, wave after wave of landing craft would hit the beaches. Simultaneously, the paratroopers who had jumped in the night would be fighting to hold the flanks. The timing was everything. The tide was everything. The weather was everything. Allied planners had calculated that this brief window, these specific conditions of tide, moon, and weather, occurred only a few days each month. They had chosen June 5th. The weather had forced a one-day delay to June 6th. There would be no more delays. This was the moment. Of all 5 beaches, Omaha would become the crucible of D-Day, a 4-mile crescent of sand backed by steep bluffs rising 30 meters above the beach. German defenders of the 352nd Infantry Division, a battle-hardened unit, occupied fortified positions along those heights. They had machine gun nests, artillery, and mortar positions that covered every inch of the sand below. The American soldiers assigned to take Omaha Beach were from the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and the 29th Infantry Division, men from Virginia and Maryland, many of whom had never been in combat. At 6:30 in the morning, the ramps of the landing craft drop into the water, and immediately, everything goes wrong. The pre-dawn bombing has missed the German defenses almost entirely. The naval bombardment has not silenced the guns on the bluffs. Tanks equipped with flotation devices designed to swim ashore sink almost immediately in the rough seas. The men of the first wave wade into chest-deep water, carrying nearly 40 kilograms of equipment under withering fire from the heights above. For several hours, the situation at Omaha is desperate. Men cluster behind the few pieces of cover available, behind beach obstacles, behind the bodies of fallen comrades, pressed against a thin seawall at the base of the bluffs. German fire comes from 3 sides. Some landing craft drift off course and deposit men in the wrong locations. Some units lose all of their officers in the first minutes. And yet the men of Omaha do not retreat. They cannot retreat. The sea is behind them. Slowly, in small groups, led by sergeants and privates when officers have fallen, men begin to find paths up the bluffs. At the western end of the beach, a group led by Brigadier General Norman Cota, a 51-year-old officer who walks upright on the beach under fire, rallies men to push inland. His words become legendary among those who survive to tell them. At Omaha Beach, individual courage, multiplied across hundreds of acts, is the only weapon that matters. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. While Omaha becomes a nightmare 4 miles to the west, something remarkable happens at Utah Beach. The American 4th Infantry Division lands almost precisely on schedule. But due to a combination of strong currents and navigational error, the first wave of landing craft drifts more than a mile south of the intended landing point. What might have been a catastrophe turns into a miracle. The actual landing point is far more lightly defended than the original target. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the 56-year-old son of President Theodore Roosevelt, is the only general officer to land in the first wave at any beach. He walks calmly along the beach under fire, leaning on a walking cane, assessing the situation. When he realizes the drift, he makes an instant decision. He will not attempt to move his men laterally along the beach to the original landing zone. He will attack from here. Right here. "We'll start the war from here," he reportedly says. Utah Beach is taken with the lightest casualties of any beach on D-Day. 4 miles to the east, the men of Omaha are still fighting for their lives. To the east of the American beaches, the British and Canadian forces are landing on Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each beach has its own story, its own heroes, its own moments of terror and triumph. At Gold Beach, the 50th Infantry Division of the British Army comes ashore at 7:25. The defenders here are determined, and the first waves take significant casualties. But the British troops push through. The town of Arromanches, which sits at the western edge of Gold Beach, will soon become the site of one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the entire war, the construction of the artificial mulberry harbors, prefabricated port structures towed across the channel, to allow massive quantities of men and supplies to land without a natural harbor. By evening, over 25,000 British troops have come ashore at Gold. At Sword Beach, the easternmost landing zone, the 3rd British Infantry Division fights through tough resistance and presses inland toward the city of Caen. They will not reach Caen on D-Day itself, but they make vital progress. And somewhere on that beach, a Scottish bagpiper named Bill Millen wades ashore, playing his pipes, standing upright, an act of extraordinary and eccentric courage that becomes one of the most iconic images of the entire war. Juno Beach is the Canadian sector, and for the soldiers of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, this day carries a weight that goes beyond military strategy. Many of these men are the sons or nephews of veterans who fought in the Great War, men who came to Europe a generation ago and suffered terribly at places like Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele. Now a new generation of Canadians crosses the channel. They land at 7:35, slightly later than planned due to the rough seas and the need to wait for the tide to cover the treacherous reef that lies just offshore. The first waves suffer heavy casualties in some sectors, particularly at the towns of Courseulles-sur-Mer and Bernières-sur-Mer, but the Canadians push through with remarkable speed and aggression. By the end of the day, the 3rd Canadian Division advances further inland than any other Allied force, reaching positions nearly 11 kilometers from the beach. Canada's contribution to D-Day, often underappreciated in popular history, is nothing short of extraordinary. As dawn breaks over Normandy and the scale of the Allied invasion becomes clear, the German High Command faces a crisis. But a crisis made far worse by their own confusion and indecision. The night before, Rommel himself had left his headquarters in France and traveled to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and to meet with Hitler to request reinforcements. He was not at his post when the invasion began. In the early morning hours, German commanders at headquarters in France are uncertain whether Normandy is the real invasion or a feint designed to draw attention away from the true landing, which many believed would come at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the channel. This belief had been carefully cultivated by an elaborate Allied deception operation called Operation Fortitude, which used fake armies, dummy equipment, and double agents to convince the Germans that General George Patton would lead the main invasion further east. The deception works brilliantly. Critical panzer armored reserves are held back from Normandy through much of the day, awaiting an attack at Calais that never comes. Even when German commanders on the ground beg for permission to release the panzer divisions, the request is delayed. Hitler, who alone can authorize the release of the reserve panzers, is asleep. His staff are afraid to wake him. When the panzers are finally authorized to move toward Normandy, it is already afternoon. Allied air forces dominate the skies over France. Every road, every rail line, every bridge that might carry German reinforcements toward the beaches is under constant attack from British and American aircraft. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit actually positioned near the beaches, manages to mount a counterattack toward the gap between Juno and Sword beaches in the late afternoon. For a brief, terrifying moment, their tanks nearly reach the coast. If they break through, they could split the Allied beachhead in two. Then, at the moment of their advance, something extraordinary happens. A massive formation of Allied aircraft appears overhead, hundreds of planes carrying the second wave of British airborne troops. The panzer commanders, fearing they are being encircled, pull back. The counterattack falters. The gap holds. The beachhead survives. numbers can only tell part of the story. By the end of June 6th, approximately 10,000 Allied soldiers have been killed, wounded, or are missing. At Omaha Beach alone, the American casualties are roughly 2,000. These are not statistics, they are sons and fathers and brothers. They are farmers from Kansas, factory workers from Ohio, fishermen from Newfoundland, dock workers from Glasgow. Each one carries a life, a story, a face that someone somewhere will spend the rest of their own life trying not to forget. Among the fallen are men like Private First Class John Steele of the 82nd Airborne, who descends by parachute onto the church steeple of Sainte-Mère-l'Église and hangs there for hours, playing dead while battle rages below him. He survives. Many others do not. There are also the men of the French 2nd Armored Division and French resistance fighters, who risked everything within occupied France itself, cutting telephone lines, sabotaging rail junctions, and guiding Allied soldiers through the Normandy bocage. This was a day of shared sacrifice across nations. And there is another dimension to the human cost of D-Day that history sometimes overlooks. The civilians of Normandy. More than 3,000 French civilians died on June 6th, and in the days immediately surrounding it, caught between the opposing forces, their towns and villages turned into battlegrounds without warning. In the town of Caen, Allied bombing and German artillery would level much of the city in the weeks ahead. The people of Normandy did not simply watch liberation arrive. They paid for it. With their homes, with their lives, with years of rebuilding that would follow the battle. Today, the people of Normandy still remember, still honor. The relationship between Normandy and the nations that landed on its shores on that June morning is one of the most enduring human bonds born from the Second World War. As darkness returns to Normandy on the evening of June 6, 1944, the situation is this. All 5 beaches are in Allied hands. The lodgment is not perfect. The D-Day objectives, those carefully drawn lines on the planning maps, have not all been reached. Caen, which was to have been captured on the first day, is still in German hands. The beachheads are not yet linked into a single continuous front. There are gaps. There are pockets of fierce resistance. The battle for Normandy has truly only just begun. It will continue for more than 2 months before the breakout is achieved. And yet, what has been accomplished on this single day is staggering. 156,000 men have crossed the English Channel and fought their way onto the European continent. The largest airborne operation in history has seized vital ground. The largest amphibious operation in history has breached the Atlantic Wall. And for the first time since 1940, the boots of free men, men fighting under the flags of more than a dozen nations, stand on the soil of Western Europe. The tide of the Second World War has turned. Rommel had been right. The first 24 hours were decisive, but not in the way he had hoped. By the time he returned to his headquarters on the evening of June 6th, racing back from Germany as fast as his staff car could carry him, it was too late to drive the Allies back into the sea. The window had passed. The Atlantic Wall, that vast and supposedly impenetrable barrier, had been breached. Germany had lost the initiative in the West. It would never regain it. From this beachhead in Normandy, the Allied forces would break out in late July, race across France, and reach the German border by autumn. Less than a year after D-Day, Adolf Hitler would be dead, and the war in Europe would be over. The longest day had decided the fate of a continent. Every year, on the 6th of June, people gather on the beaches of Normandy. Veterans, fewer with every passing year. Families of the fallen, making pilgrimages to white crosses in immaculate cemeteries. School children from France and Britain and America and Canada, learning the weight of what happened on this ground. The American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer holds the graves of 9,387 Americans who died in the Normandy campaign. Nearby, the German war cemetery at Le Combe holds more than 21,000 German graves. Across the region, more than 20 cemeteries speak silently to the cost of those weeks in the summer of 1944. What D-Day ultimately represents is not simply a military victory. It is a testament to what free peoples can accomplish when they set aside their differences and commit to a common purpose. It is a reminder that freedom is not free, that it has always been purchased at great cost by young men and women willing to step forward into uncertainty, to cross the water, to face the unknown, for a principle larger than themselves. You are about to embark upon the great crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. June 6, 1944 did not end the war. It began the end. It took 11 more months of brutal fighting across Western Europe before Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. But without D-Day, without those 24 hours, without the courage of 156,000 men who crossed a cold and hostile sea toward a fortified shore, the history of the 20th century would have been written very differently. Rommel called it the longest day. For the men who lived through it, and for the families of those who did not, no description could be more accurate. This was a day measured not in hours, but in heartbeats, in choices made in an instant that echoed across decades, in the extraordinary, ordinary courage of people who were afraid, and went forward anyway. That is the legacy of D-Day. That is why, 80 years later, we still stand on these beaches. We still count the crosses. We still say the names, lest we forget.